Hello and welcome to another episode of OPE. We are the Ohana Packers Edition podcast. I am Iowa Joe, and as you can see, Mike is not here again tonight. He is doing tree work with his father-in-law, so happy wife, happy life. So he's over there taking care of things. But I do have a special guest to join me tonight. I have followed this guy for a long time now, literally, figuratively, however you want to put it. So I enjoy a lot of his content. I am a big supporter of a lot of his causes. It is the Yankee Marshal. Yank, how's it going tonight?
Pretty good. If I'd have known Mike wasn't going to be here, I wouldn't have come. But you didn't tell me it was going to be no Mike.
Well, he is my poster child. He is the whole reason why there is a Hawaiian theme to everything. I do want to point this out though, because we are going to get some crossover listeners. There are no tubes or wires or anything here, so I must be real. There's no fakeness.
Yeah, when you told me it was a pre-recorded, I was like, because I don't do pre-recorded podcasts. I always has to go out live because I've had bad people re-editing things I've said in the past. Although if we're going to be talking about wrestling, I don't think it's going to matter.
No, there should be no issues with that. As people who listen to my podcast know, I'm as real as can be. I don't edit my episodes unless there's a major flub and we're just cutting it, or if there's a time thing or whatever. So no issues there.
If you do any trickery to make it sound like I said John Cena was one of my favorite wrestlers, I will hunt you down.
Well, we might save that for the TikTok, but not for the actual podcast. But anyway, like the Yank alluded to, we are going to be doing the top 5 pro wrestlers. I'm not so much a watcher of it at the moment because of work schedules and stuff like that, but I was big into it from a wee little lad until my college years, and then, like I said, just work habits and that I haven't been able to get into it. But I know that's one thing Yank likes to talk about. That's one thing I can do a lot of talking about. It's kind of a good thing maybe Mike's not here because he was kind of balking at the idea of having to do wrestlers because he hasn't watched it in a long time. But I know there's a good part of our listenership that does pay attention to it all. So I figured, why not get somebody on here and do our top 5 wrestlers?
Well, to be honest, I don't watch it all that much anymore either because I find most of it repulsive. But I still do watch a little bit. And I keep up on it more through people like Al Snow, Jim Cornette, and Dirty Dutch. I listen to what they have to say about the new people in the new wrestling, and it just reconfirms why I don't want to be watching it right now.
And see, a lot of mine does the same thing. I do watch clips from Dutch's podcast with James or whatever that guy's name is.
He's Fern.
Yeah. But I also I get to stay home on weekends, so I do catch the PLEs or pay-per-views or whatever the hell they're calling them anymore, because most of the WWE ones are on the Peacock network, and I've already got Peacock. But I think tonight on recording is Forbidden Door for AEW, and obviously I'm not paying attention to that right now.
I tried watching AEW. I gave it my best go. I wanted to like it, and it just got worse and worse every time I watched it. It seemed like they more and more threw tradition and storyline and everything else out the door in favor of gymnastics and choreographed moves that I just couldn't watch it anymore.
I do have to admit they have a good chunk of wrestlers over there that I tend to lean towards. Like I'm a big Adam Cole guy just because I think even though he's a smaller guy, he's got a good feel on the mic, and he does have the ability to go in the ring and stuff like that. Or Danielson, Claudio. I do like Claudio, even though he's not big on the mic.
Didn't he start off in Ohio Valley Wrestling before he went to WWE, then AEW?
I don't think it was Ohio Valley, but it was the one before NXT. It was like FCW or something like that.
Okay.
Because I think it was him, Tyler Breeze, Austin Creed, Big E, and those guys were in the whatever, like Roman Reigns and all that were in it before it became NXT.
See, I like Claudio and Danielson, but the first one you mentioned, Adam Cole. If I'm 85% sure I can beat you in a fight, then I'm not going to take you as a wrestler. Just not going to.
Right.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of, and like I said, I did say he's kind of small, but I see a lot of Shawn Michaels in him, where he's got the movability and he's got the natural ability to be a heel and be enjoyable to listen to on the mic. But yeah, he is rather small, and it is kind of hard to. But you also have to put the idea of actual combat out of your mind when you're watching some of these guys anyway. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into our list. Do you have any honorable mentions before we start doing our top fives?
Well, I'm totally unprepared, but the thing for me to choose my top five, I'm coming at it from an example of, like, I'm not building a Mount Rushmore of the best wrestlers ever. I'm just going to say the ones I personally have gotten more enjoyment from over the years, that I've enjoyed watching and I've still love to this day. Because there's a lot of people that, if I was going to have to put the most important people on the list, it would be people like Ric Flair would definitely have to be on there. Andre the Giant would have to be on there. People like Jimmy Valiant and stuff like that would be on there. But Mr. Wrestling #2, all these kind of guys, Tommy Rich, but they're not my favorites. So I'm just going to go with my 5 favorite wrestlers.
Right, and that's all I expect. I'm not, because like you said, it's kind of a hard thing to really pin down like a Rushmore, because you're going to have to pick a lot of the same ones. Like you said, Ric Flair. I mean, you probably even have to throw Hogan on there just because of what he did for, and Andre and all that. But no, these are just your top 5 favorite guys, or some reason behind your top 5. But if you don't have any honorable mentions, I do have a couple that they were
all those guys that I just mentioned, plus probably Junkyard Dog.
All right. Well, the 2 that I had as my honorable mentions is Jake the Snake and Arn Anderson.
Yeah, Jake.
Yeah, Jake the Snake. Even though I'm petrified of snakes and all that, that was one thing that I didn't like. But he was a master of the mic. He was the master of the DDT. He was the master. I mean, he was basically a Bray Wyatt type before Bray Wyatt was, in wrestling, because he had that, what's the word I want to use for it?
Je ne sais quoi.
Something like that, but where he could be a cult leader type because he had that style of speech to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Arn Anderson, I don't care anything in the world, he throws the best spine buster you ever wanted to see.
No, him and Ole were both great. So so both of them deserve to be on a Mount Rushmore. And since you did say, I will do one solid honorable mention here, that I really love this wrestler. Have loved him since when I first became aware of him. And it's Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's one of my favorites, even though he just gets inched off of my top 5 list. If this was a top 10 list, he'd be on it. He'd probably be number 6. But because it's just the top 5, he just got inched off because there's so many guys that I'd already been watching for 30 years by the time I started watching Stone Cold.
Right. And my list obviously is going to have maybe a little bit more recent stuff than what yours is, but I do know a lot of the old school stuff. Just like Bruno. Bruno didn't quite make my list because I didn't grow up watching him, but I know who Bruno is.
New York, and I was Mid-Atlantic, so I was watching NWA and World Championship and stuff. I wasn't watching New York wrestling.
Well, and see, I'm in the boat a little bit too, because obviously, like me and you joke about Iowa. Does it even exist? Is it is it a?
I'm not joking.
But I live in the middle of nowhere, and we didn't get USA when I grew up. so a lot of the WWE, or at the time WWF stars, I didn't know unless I went somewhere and watched them that actually got USA, or that's back when a friend would record it on VHS and then it'd make its rounds in the group, and you would be able to watch a Monday Night Raw, but maybe like 4 weeks after it actually took place or whatever.
For me to watch wrestling back when I was a kid, well, we didn't usually have cable, so I'd have to had cable, but we also did get Channel 17 from Atlanta. So that's where I watched most of my wrestling, was on Channel 17 from Atlanta. And occasionally, like late at night, and I was a night owl even when I was a kid, like instead of signing off at midnight, they would play reruns of wrestling shows. So
right, and see, that's how I was. I grew up with just getting TBS for a wrestling, my wrestling stuff. So I grew up a huge WCW guy. I never missed a Saturday night or a Thunder. We didn't get TNT, so I never got to watch a Nitro. But when Thunder came about, I got to at least see it 2 nights a week.
I think I might be older than you because I was more of the Georgia Championship Wrestling. Gordon Sully and.
Well, we all know you're older than me. You're older than dirt, anyways. So, but it just.
I'm not young, that's for sure.
Well, I'm not getting any younger either. But anyway, we've done our honorable mentions. Do you want to go ahead and go with your number 5 guy?
Let's see. I think I actually wrote them down here. My number 5 guy is a Dusty Rhodes.
See, I remember Dusty Rhodes more as a commentator than I did get to see him as a wrestler.
I grew up in the prime Dusty Rhodes era.
Yeah, see, I remember him doing commentary on WCW content, so that's where I more got to see him. Because I think I'm about Cody's age.
Oh,
so yeah, so
Bionic Elbow, his feuds with Ric Flair, and everybody else he had a feud with. I mean, it never hurt that he was the booker sometimes when he was having moments. So he was writing the script and acting it out too. But he was always entertaining, and on the microphone, I don't think anyone's ever had the same charisma as he had. There's some people that might equal him, but no one that's ever had the same type of charisma he had on the mic. And it was often more fun to watch Dusty run his mouth and then get his ass kicked and then run his mouth again, waiting for him to finally win. That was even more fun, I think, than watching him finally win.
I will say that he's probably the only one that you can say that made a lisp cool.
Yeah, he definitely did.
So my number 5 is more of a modern guy, and I know this is going to be a major controversial one to put on a list, but I think if you could subtract everything from backstage stuff and politicking and all that stuff, he would be in a lot of top 5s, but I think the sourness of behind the scenes and everything, and that's CM Punk. I think he really brought back a lot of the mic work stuff along with being a legit wrestler.
He's my favorite current wrestler, so that's not controversial to me.
Right, but you know what I'm saying. All the backstage stuff when he left WWE originally, and
I think that's only a problem with like the smart fans who are more into the personal drama of their favorite actors than they are into the actual wrestling. But when it comes to actual wrestling, CM Punk is definitely one of the best around today.
Right. And, I know his body's kind of given out on him a little bit now where he's been kind of constantly injured, but he's brought me back into the fold. And he did that originally when he started wrestling for WWE, CW, and stuff like that, because he could be that mic guy and he could be that wrestler guy. But then the pipe bomb just kind of cinched it for me that, hey, this guy is legit.
And he had to win me over too. I was aware of him from, like his indie days and from the ECW times and stuff. But he had to win me over once he came to the WWE. I wasn't certain about him, but then after I saw him saw him talk, then I was like, yeah, he's one of the better ones today.
And not to get into the drama of it all, but I understand some of what he was talking about when he walked away in 2011, and then just to see what was going on behind the scenes with the AEW stuff. And I can see a lot of his side to it, but they always say this side has their story, that side has their story, and the truth's in the middle somewhere. So
but
I
that's
mean,
always true. Sometimes people are just worthless dicks, like the Young Bucks. So,
and I'm not a big Young Bucks fan anyway.
because
I
I
think
thought you were going when you said it was going to be controversial, because of the backstage stuff, I'm like, if he says Young Bucks, I have to leave. Because if you're not going to take this seriously, I'm leaving.
no, I can honestly say I'm not a Young Bucks fan. I'm not even and I think that's why I at first I was like you were AEW. I thought was going to be amazing because it was going to be back to wrestling. It wasn't going to be this sports entertainment crap. But then I got to watching more of it, and it just reminds me of another TNA. They're letting the inmates run the asylum, and you've got a Mark as an owner, and he's just throwing money into it because he wants to see these people. The latest rumors I've seen is one, there were talks about bringing Goldberg in for a match, and two, they were going to bring Shane McMahon over. He was going to jump ship to AEW.
I don't think either of those will happen, but
I don't think it's well. I mean, the Goldberg thing.
I don't want to see Goldberg, so
I just think that it was, if any of them's more possible, it's probably going to be the Goldberg one, just because of.
Well, yeah, you throw enough money at Goldberg, he'll do whatever.
And Tony's got the money, and he's enough of a mark to do it. But to continue on the list, what's your number 4?
At number 4, I have Jake the Snake Roberts.
Okay, so I can go with that.
Yeah, he's always been one of my favorites. I've always leaned more towards bad guys than good guys. And because like I've always said, if I was a Jedi, I wouldn't be a Jedi, I'd be Sith. My personality. So I've always leaned towards bad guys, and as far as wrestlers go, he's one of the best bad guys ever. And even though he's not one of those like cool heels kind of guys like Diesel or even Roddy Piper, he's just a bad guy most of the times. And it just seemed that sometimes people you like less got on his bad side, but he was never a baby face. He was just always Jake the Snake, and he was pure evil, and he was awesome.
And I think the only time, and I know I kind of got you into watching Dark Side of the Ring, and the only time that you could really get a face reaction for him was when Earthquake crushed Damien. And that was the only time that I think you could really say that Jake ever went in face.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I always loved Jake Snake growing up. I just like, because he on the mic, he's one of the few people that were as good on the mic as Dusty Rhodes, but he was a different type of guy on the mic. He was like almost brainwashing people that listened to him. He was just like playing the psychology game, and he was the best at it of anyone I've ever seen. And I just love it. And in the ring, he never really did much, but you thought he was doing a lot because he was so good at it, at the psychological side and the technical side. But he just did very little, but he did it in a way that made him, like I said, one of my favorite of all time.
And he wasn't one of those bodybuilder types either. He was just a regular body, but he knew the inside and outside of the ring.
Regular 6'5", 300, 270 pound regular guy, but
he didn't have 6-pack abs and the rippling muscles and anything. He was.
I met him once a long time ago, and I was surprised how large he was when I saw him, because he looked small next to some of the other wrestlers, but he was a fairly large man.
Well, and then when I watched the Dark Side of the Ring, and they were talking about his dad's even bigger than him, from what it sounded like. So, but I missed Jake by a night. He was supposed to be in a nearby town this was when he was doing his comedy routine. And I had Friday night off, but he was going to be there Saturday night, and I had to work Saturday night. So I missed it by a night. But anyway, my number 4, and this one is not controversial by any means, but I don't think he would make a lot of people's list. And I'm going to call him Ming because that's how I knew him but basically Haku.
Yeah, Haku.
I know him more as Ming just because, like I said, WCW days, that's what he was. It was Ming and Barbarian, Faces of Fear. And, for being a big guy, he could move.
Mhm.
And then,
All the Samoans move as big guys. The Wild Samoans and
yeah.
Rikishi and all of them. A lot of them are really big dudes, but they could still move.
But this is also a guy, when you actually got to hear about outside the ring stuff, was a legit, badass.
Yeah. Well, I never thought for even a minute that I had a single digit chance of winning in a fight against him if I didn't have a shot. So yeah, he's believable as a badass, and a lot of the Samoan guys are believable as badasses. And one thing I've always heard from everybody that's ever wrestled them, and I had an ex-roommate that's wrestled him. He used to work as a jobber for WCW and NWA, and he's wrestled them, and he's like, they're the gentlest wrestlers ever. They're not stiff at all. When they forearm you, it feels like they're hitting you with a pillow. He's like, everything they do, because they're so strong that they can just move you around and put you where they want you without hurting you. So,
well, and I think his backstory was at like 13 or 14, they sent him to Japan to be a sumo wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And so he started out as a sumo. And, you think about it, some of the other guys that were that way started out in sumo. I mean, I was just talking about Earthquake, John Tinta. He was a sumo guy. Yoko was a sumo type guy.
Well, he always looked like a sumo guy, even
right.
Pro wrestling.
But Ming, I mean, and I've seen interviews with him and I've seen him do stuff, and he's such a quiet and laid back guy. It's hard to believe he would be the type that would, like stories, beat up 10 cops or rip a guy's eye out of his socket or bite his nose off and stuff like that.
He never had anything to prove, so he didn't have to be loud.
Right.
Badass dogs don't have to bark.
Right. But he was, I mean, even though as a kid he was more like a scary type, it was always fun when you got to see him in the ring because he was showy. When, he was that, he was the savage type, he like the Kamala type character where, he would come out talking gibberish and waving his hair about and all that stuff. So it was a good show.
He was, I like all the Samoan wrestlers pretty much, except for maybe The Rock.
Yeah, I mean, I was obviously, when I was right smack dab in the middle of wrestling, it was Rock and Stone Cold and all those guys. So,
I was always like, oh great, The Rock's starting the show. I got 20 minutes to go do something before anything ever happens, other than him soliloquying himself for his own benefit.
Yeah. So all right, number 3.
Number 3 on my list is The Undertaker.
Okay.
Huge Undertaker.
Okay.
Even when he was Mean Mark Callis, and I've met him too, and he's gigantic. He's looking freak of nature when you stand next to him. I saw him come through a doorway, and the doorway just disappeared as he was coming through it. And he's just a huge guy, and he is so good in the ring, and he played his character to the utmost. And like I said, I first saw him when he was Mean Mark Callis. And then when he became The Undertaker, I was like, oh, I've seen this guy before. And I'm like, I don't know how this is going to work out because, this redheaded guy playing this, supernatural. But that went on to be the most phenomenal run of any wrestler ever, I think, at least in my book. So definitely a huge fan. And what I'm really loving now is now that he is done with wrestling, because he never did interviews. He never did shoots. But now he's doing interviews. He's doing shoots. He's sharing his stories. And it's just like I've been eating them up online because I watched one where him and Mick Foley watched the Hell in a Cell match together. And I was just like, see, this is awesome now. Now I get to see him be Mark Callis again after all that run of The Undertaker. And that was one of the best to me. So he's definitely on my list.
I definitely love The Undertaker. One of my earliest, well, I won't say earliest, but one of my major memories of ever watching a pay-per-view was I was staying with my brother. My brother's about 10 years older than I am. So, you know, he was out on his own and everything. And I was staying with my brother, and he got SummerSlam one year. He paid for the pay-per-view for SummerSlam. And it had to be a first blood match between Stone Cold and Undertaker. And I mean, it was just going all over the place. And finally, it was Stone Cold nailing Undertaker with a camera that broke him open. And so, but yeah, I agree. Taker, I mean, I will say Taker's not currently on my list because, again, it wasn't until later that I got to watch a lot of WWE stuff. So even though I knew who Undertaker was and I knew all that stuff, it's hard for them to make my list just because I didn't grow up with them. It wasn't until
I watched Undertaker from day one minus because I saw him, before he became Undertaker.
Right. But my number 3 is one that I will admit I didn't get to watch too much of while he was still wrestling. But the town that I work in is another town that supposedly he got arrested for being too drunk and got into it with some cops, but that's Andre the Giant. And the other reason why he's on my list is, like you said earlier, if you're going to have if you were to make a Mount Rushmore, you'd have to put Andre on there because he was, he was the Undertaker of the time. He was that top dog.
He's also one of very few people Ming was afraid of.
Right. And what was the shoot that I watched one time? It was Bad News Brown, where Andre went to do his sit down splash and ended up shitting all over Bad News Brown's chest.
Yes, some gross stories. But yeah, I've always liked Andre. The only thing the reason he's not on my top list is simply because I didn't see him wrestle a lot in the day because, I wasn't really big because he traveled from circuit, from territory to territory a lot. So you saw him rarely. So I knew he was out there and I knew he was like the unstoppable force in wrestling. But because you knew he was the unstoppable force, you almost always pretty much knew what was going to happen.
Right.
He got in the WWE and he was really broken down, and they passed the torch to Hogan. That I think a lot of people paid more attention to him, and unfortunately, his career was already over at that point, and I didn't get to see as much as I'd like to of his earlier career. But I would have liked to see more of it, but I didn't. And like I said, he was kind of the unstoppable person, so it was kind of like how this is going to go.
Yeah, and it again, like Ming, he's one of those that he, like you said, he could be legit, but and not unless he had to.
Yeah, he was a very sweet person from what I hear, unless he didn't like you.
Right. And I think Jake said that he was one of those that for some reason Andre never liked him.
He didn't. And my great aunt flew on a plane once with Andre, and he was in first class, and he took the whole row he was in first class. They took the dividers out between the seats and put a cushion down on top of it so he could sit in first class, and took the seats out in front so he could sit there, even in first class. So,
and there's a picture that I seen recently that I never really, I don't think I've ever seen before, but he was riding an old 3-wheeler. And it's like, man, that's a lot of weight for that 3-wheeler. That must have been supersized.
Probably on his farm, because I've seen him riding around on that 3-wheeler on his farm before. But yeah, so he was a big dude, and he's Andre. And if there was a Mount Rushmore, he'd definitely be on it. But I just had other wrestlers I've gotten more joy out of in my life.
Yeah, I mean, I had to put Andre just because of what he brought to wrestling. Kind of like the CM Punk thing, where he's the one that was the star. He's what brought people in, and he made a lot of people too, like you said, Hogan and stuff like that with the passing of the torch. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, there's a lot of stories that you hear about Andre that are just amazing. Like him hating Big John Studd because I'm the only giant.
Yeah, because he stepped over the top rope. He got his ass kicked multiple times because of that over the next few years.
And he ran out of the ring, got in his car, and left immediately.
Yep.
because he was worried what would happen in the locker room.
Yep. Because Andre
Or
told him, don't step over the top rope. I'm the only one that steps over the top rope. He stepped over the top rope. So he took what he had coming to him.
yeah, so and then I remember I think it was Marty Jannetty, and of course you got to take anything Marty Jannetty says with a grain of salt.
Murderer.
Yeah.
Nelly.
But when him and Michaels were the Rockers, and they were tagging with Andre, he said that they would have to let Andre put his hands on their head just to guide him to and from the ring and in and out of the ring. And, you know, it sucks that he had to continue doing appearances like that because you could tell it was taking the toll on him. But it was great that he was still giving back to younger wrestlers.
I think he still wanted to do it. I think he would rather do that for as long as he could and die earlier than he would have stopped doing it and live a little longer. I think he really preferred it that way. So,
right, and I will say, and I know this is going to sound bad because they build the Paul White as the son of Andre, but they have a lot of similarities in their path. Not just because they were both giant men and everything, but when they were younger, they were able to throw drop kicks and they were able to, you know, come off the top rope and everything. And then they got to the point where it was too much for them to handle, and they had to go to more of a ground and pound style of wrestling. But
I like him a lot, Big Show.
Yeah,
but he's not on my favorites. But I do like him. And I think people gave him too much shit for a long time about being the fake Andre. But I'm like, dude, he's awesome in his own right. If there'd never been an Andre, well, then people would have thought this guy was like the most amazing wrestler at his size doing what he was doing. But because he's a little bit by the Andre legacy, I think he got an unfair shake sometimes.
Right. And I remember, see, that was in prime of me watching WCW was when he was coming about. And, you know, just to see this big guy throwing a drop kick or, you know, insecurities and off the top rope and all this other stuff that he could do is just amazing. And I'm glad he was able to get away from WCW in a sense, because I think WCW was doing more harm to him than any good because they were just lumping him in with like the NWO and stuff like that and not letting him be that dominant force. Whereas as soon as he went into WWE, even though he was an enforcer there, he was still able to do a lot of his own shtick. So
came into his own right.
Yeah. So Yank, number 2.
Number 2, well, of course, I'm going to go with the all-time god of wrestling, Mick Foley.
Yeah, I can see that.
I have always liked Mick Foley. My favorite incarnation of Mick Foley is Cactus Jack. Of course, I liked Mankind. Him and Undertaker, those are legendary bouts. You know, and I know a lot of people, when he did Hell in the Cell, that sealed him with a lot of fans. I was like, oh, he's amazing. But I've liked him as Cactus Jack, as Mick Foley. I even like when they brought the Dude Love thing in at the end. That was cute too. He's always had that ability to be an awesome wrestler, an awesome performer, an awesome personality, but still come across as someone who's intelligent and you know, a thoughtful person and multi-talented. So I've always enjoyed his performances. He always gave 110%, you know, and I appreciated it because I enjoyed every show, and I thought he was the perfect foil to the Undertaker. Plus, when he started mixing it up with Triple H and stuff later in his career, you know, and when he went back to Cactus Jack, that was amazing. And him and his Terry Funk stuff, it was just awesome. Although I'm not a big fan of like barbed wire matches and stuff,
right?
I can appreciate what they did. I wish it didn't come off as, and it could only be done by people like Terry Funk and Mick Foley. I think a perfect testimony to how good Mick Foley and Terry Funk are, which Terry Funk would have also been on my list if it had just been a little longer, is how bad the wrestlers today are at it. Yeah. When they do gimmick matches, it just comes across as a pathetic gimmick. Funk and Cactus Jack, they could make it look like a life or death event that was real and that was believable. and these new guys just make it look like a clown show. So I think that's a testament to how good those guys actually were.
Well, and when Terry Funk and Mick were doing their things, it was over in Japan where they actually wanted to see that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas when they were coming over here, they had a harder time doing it because they had network sponsors that they didn't want to offend, and they had all this other stuff that they had to water it down. But I agree, Mick. Mick didn't make my list because there's a couple others that had a big impact on me. But Mick is a great one. I mean,
he's one of the few that I still watch his matches now that I've seen 100 times, and I still say, "Oh my fucking God." That's awesome. And even though I've seen it 10, 15 times, I still have that reaction when I watch it.
Or just some of the promos he cut, because he was another master on the mic. So yeah, I love Mick. He's a great guy. My number 2, I kind of did a change up last minute because you mentioned the name. I was like, man, how did I leave that guy off my list? Because I've always loved the guy, and that's Roddy Piper. And he's another one that was a legit guy in the ring, legit on the mic. He could go toe to toe with almost anybody on the mic.
He could hit you. As I heard someone say one time, that Roddy Piper, if you really pissed him off in the ring, he could hit you 3 times. You'd be on your ass before you even saw his hands move.
Yeah. And he really, he had the Irishman kind of shtick going. And even then,
Scotsman.
The Scotsman. Yeah, that's it. Sorry. I went elsewhere with it, but he was still him. He wasn't playing a character. He was just him. Right. And he just, I got to see a lot of him in WCW because of even after he had his hip replacement and still going through and being legit with it. The only thing that I wish they would have changed, and I understand at the time that he was coming through, it was a legit finisher, was I wish they would have gave him something other than the sleeper.
Yeah.
Because by the time it got down to where he was doing this stuff in the mid-90s and the early 2000s, the sleeper was an everyday move.
I always thought he could have done the Superman punch if that had been a thing back in the day that you wouldn't have got disqualified for. Like that as a finisher, but that would have been awesome for him if it had been okay back then.
Yeah, or do the big show, WMD, where it was just the one knockout punch.
Yeah.
But Rowdy, I got to go Rowdy. I miss that man to this day because he was another one that I go back and I'll watch his promos, and it just get the chill down my spine because you can tell he's putting everything into these promos.
And even his acting, when he would act, he was awesome. Yeah. Like on Always Sunny in Philadelphia, some of his last works he did, he's amazing on those. It's just like he's incredible. And I remember my fondest memory of Roddy Piper, I was standing in the mall looking in the window of a pet store because I'm like, I don't like pet stores and I didn't like the puppies that were there. And Roddy Piper was looking over my I could see in the window, Roddy Piper came up behind me and goes, "Little furry prisoners." And I was like, oh, it's Roddy Piper, because he lived over in the Beaverton, Hillsborough area. And I worked in that area, so I would see him every now and then at the mall.
Yeah, I mean, that was...
So I'm one day just walking down the street in front of I think it was Bob Lamphier's Dodge dealership. Just walking down the street, I'm like, I wonder how many people driving by realize that that's Roddy Piper just walking down the street. He's probably going back to his car parked on a side street because there's restaurants there and stuff. But I was like, how many people I wonder realize that that's Roddy Piper walking down the street?
Now, you would know more than I do, but he's the one that went back and revitalized Washington wrestling, didn't he?
Yes, he came up here and he started it back up, and I got to meet him a few times when he was doing that because my roommate John was a professional wrestler, also the one I told you worked as a job guy, and he wrestled in that organization as a couple of different wrestlers. He wrestled as a masked tag team, and then he would job as a unmasked guy too. He's 6'3", 320, 330 pounds. So, or 6'6" and 330 pounds. So he was a big guy, but he was also a drag queen as well as a professional wrestler. So and we always build him as the largest drag queen in captivity because by the time he put heels on, he would look like he was 7 feet tall and 400 pounds.
Yeah.
He'd wrestle on Sundays, Thursdays and Sundays, and on Saturdays he'd be on stage as a drag queen.
Hey, you do what you got to do, man. All right, so we are down to number 1.
Well, I'm not going to have to add much to my number 1 because we just talked about him. It's Rowdy Piper.
Rowdy.
Yeah, he's always been one of my favorites. You know, I know a lot of people started loving him, you know, from the coconut to the head for Jimmy Snuka.
Yeah.
I always liked him, even when you were supposed to hate him because he's a bad guy. He's just one of those bad guys that I could never hate. It's almost like if Rowdy Piper started going up against a baby face, well, then I didn't like that baby face anymore. I wanted Rowdy Piper to win. So
yeah.
I was always on his side, no matter what side of the argument he was on, just because I enjoyed him so much.
I did what was the shoots? It was called Kayfabe Commentaries or something. I think it was like Sean Oliver or whatever. And that one of the few ones that I've watched over and over again are the clips from the Rowdy interview, because I mean, talk about a guy that had stories and would sit there and tell them, and yeah. And I remember him talking about the coconut to the head of Jimmy Snuka, and he always said he thought he killed him.
Yeah.
Just as soon as he hit, he thought he killed him.
Swung a little too hard, and he was like, "Oh my God, I think I just caved his skull in." But luckily, Snuka had a hard head, so.
Well, yeah, and had other problems to go with that. So.
Oh yeah, Snuka. Yeah, he won't be on any of my favorites ever because, you know, he's kind of Benoit-ish as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and obviously neither one of those are going to end up on my list either. But my number 1, and it's not going to be agreed upon by some, but again, I have to preference this that I grew up a huge WCW fan, and and this guy was probably, other than I will say like Ric Flair, this guy was probably and he was called the icon of WCW, and that's Sting. And
you were going to say Sting as soon as you started.
Yeah, because I was a Stinger. I remember the bleach blonde, you know, the colorful paint, and the Surfer Sting, and all the way through the Crow Sting and all his iterations. And you know, I
like later Sting way better than early Sting. Like when he was tag teaming with Warrior and all that kind of crap when they first came out, I didn't really care for that gimmick. I didn't like the painted face and the bleach blonde hair, muscle body builder guys. I just wasn't that big into those. So I never really cared for him in his earlier days. It was not till later, you know, like after his Ric Flair feuds and stuff, that I really started, you know, enjoying some of his work. But towards the end, I think he suffered from people he did way more standing around in the rafters than he did actually wrestling towards the end. And it got a little old after a while.
Well, and I think he even admits it. He was also battling his drug addiction at the time. So he was not only going through this storyline character, but he was also having his demons. And that's when he found Jesus and all that stuff. And, but I will admit my earliest memories of wrestling are Sting. I remember my brother would go next door and help our next door neighbor who was a race car driver, and he would help work on his car and all that. And I remember watching one of the Ric Flair Sting matches over at the neighbor's house where it went to a draw. And it was one of the few times that you could remember at the time where you would actually have the announcer come over the intercom that 5 minutes left in this match. There are 5 minutes until this match is over. And it would get down to the last second. And I can't remember who won, but I just remembered those moments of, and I think Sting would also admit that the feuds with Ric Flair early on is what built him as Sting, because he was a nobody pretty much when he was running with Warrior and all that stuff. And then it was
back then I kind of saw him as a Lex Luger with face paint.
Yeah. And then it would be no wonder that he would later become friends with Lex Luger.
No. Not many people did, so that's odd that someone became friends with Lex Luger. Because most people did not like Lex Luger. They thought he was standoffish and snobbish. I just think he wasn't that personable. He wasn't that outgoing. And a lot of people in the wrestling business are very outgoing. So if you're just normal, they think you're standoffish and snobbish.
Well, and you hear the same thing about Sid Vicious too, because Sid was more worried about his softball schedule than his wrestling schedule.
Way more worried about it.
So, well, that's our top fives. Yank, I really appreciate you taking time out. I know we throw our jabs back and forth each other on your nightly chats, but you know, hey, I figured I'd throw out a hand to say, hey, hop on and get you to talk something other than guns for a while.
Now, wrestling is one of the things I do love as much as guns.
So, well, me too. I mean, obviously, I don't have near the collection that you have at the moment, but
guns, cars, and wrestling, you can't go wrong with those things.
And when I was telling Mike about this episode, I go, we have 3 topics we can choose from: guns, cars, wrestling. And I said, I know nothing about cars. I don't want to make Yank continue to talk about guns because he does it 7 nights a week. So let's just do wrestling and get it out of the way.
Yep, that's fine with me.
But Yank, you want to go ahead and tell people where they can find you at?
On YouTube, just the Yankee Marshall on YouTube. That's pretty much it.
You want to pitch your merch stuff and some of the stuff that you work on?
YouTube, you'll see my merch. So,
all right. Well,
you want to know about the things we work on? We do the TYM Triple P, which is the Yankee Marshall Pistol Project. That's where we provide the means for lower income families to obtain what they need to protect themselves and their loved ones. That's the way we say it on the internet without getting people mad at it. And we run pets and vets programs where we help out as many pet charities and vet charities, and even help out individuals that have GoFundMe's for pet surgeries, care of pets, things like that. We try to help as many people as possible. If I'm going to be on the internet talking guns all the time, I try to put what little we earn towards doing something good. So that's why we run those projects. If you want to support them, you can go become a Patreon member, Subscribe Star member, or you can go to my website, tympistolproject.com. I always get it wrong. And over there's links to join up or buy merchandise, and all that supports our programs.
And they're good causes. I can attest that everything that he does is for the causes that he says he does them for. Don't listen to the liars out there. They're just assholes.
Well,
but
they don't want to have to do it too, so they try to pretend I don't.
But Yank, like I said, it was great to have you on. You can find our show on all the socials at Ohana_Packers. Go over to our website, ohanapackers.org, and check out our merch store. Find our articles, find all the past shows, whether in video or audio form. That's going to do it for this week. So, as Mike would say, go pack, go, and aloha.